Thanks for attending the webinar today on the role of innovation. Before we get started, I'd like to give you a little bit of background on my company, New Product Visions. I help organizations improve their earnings and revenue through innovation. My focus is on the processes, the role of management, organization type issues, as well as the culture. I provide consulting, the Innovation Coach workshops, as well as some software enablers that I use with organizations to support the processes. Prior to starting this company, I spent 30 plus years in industry, primarily in manufacturing companies in a variety of roles: sales and marketing, service and support, manufacturing, as well as just prior to starting this company was VP of technology for about a $250 million analytical instrument business based on the East Coast. When it comes to innovation, I'm a generalist. I've been involved in all aspects of the processes from the very beginning all the way to the point where the products go in the market, and then life cycle management. Second, I also view innovation as a key business process, not simply the role of R&D. I think that's a mistake many organizations make when it comes to innovation, particularly in terms of senior management. And finally, I'm particularly passionate about the role of senior management. Whoever's responsible for the P&L is ultimately responsible for the success or failure of innovation. To begin with, I want you to think about your business in terms of traditionally how you approach growing your business. And I've laid out here what I think are three kind of typical strategies. Of course, every business will rely on some level of organic growth in their core business, though that is typically not, you can't rely on that 100%, but it's certainly a portion of the year in and year out growth in the business. Second is the concept of geographic expansion. Of course, there are many opportunities for many companies to expand at least their revenue base by expanding geographically, going into markets that they don't currently serve, and that is an appropriate strategy for many companies. Finally is the concept of acquisitions. You know, if the cash flow provides that opportunity for a business, acquisitions can be an important part in terms of adding new sources of revenue into the business and quickly, entering into markets, getting into certain technologies that you might not otherwise be able to do. However, I would say that while acquisitions are a good way to bring new technology and new sources of revenue, it can't be the only way. Innovation, internal innovation, is still very important and is advantageous in many cases compared to acquisitions. There was a survey recently in a local business magazine in South Carolina, and they surveyed manufacturing companies in the state and asked them what big initiatives did they have planned for 2016. And as this slide illustrates, the results were about a third indicated that we're going to come out with a big new ad campaign. About a third said that they were going to stay the course, basically. And the final third was kind of split between a capital investment and an acquisition. This kind of caught my attention, illustrates the point here that not one company, at least that was reported here, indicated that they had an initiative this year in order to get better at innovation. As important as innovation is, and as much press as it gets in terms of its importance to organizations, it didn't seem like one company in this survey actually felt like getting better at innovation was something that they needed to do in 2016. So that caught my attention in terms of, is that a trend? Is it a trend in your company in terms of ignoring the role of innovation, in lieu of some of these other strategies for growing the business? And I think if you are ignoring innovation and getting better at innovation, then you're missing a real opportunity. So really there are two key questions for you, and that is, does innovation play a big enough role in your organization? And if it doesn't, and you want to get better at it, well, what are the key aspects of improving your ability to innovate? And that's really what we're going to talk about today. So to start with, since we're going to be dealing with innovation, I think I wanted to first start with my basic definition of innovation. This is a word that's probably overused today. I kind of cringe when I say it, because I think it's used and abused in the business lexicon today, but I think it's important to talk about it. I view innovation as a means to an end. In other words, we don't do innovations in companies for the fun of it. In my estimation, that's a science experiment and belongs in academia, if anything, but that's not why we do it in industry. It's for a payoff at some point. It may be a long-term payoff, but there's got to be some kind of a payoff, so it is a means to an end. This graphic, for me, explains what innovation is, which is really a process that mediates two things that are happening. One is technology, and the arrow implies that technology, of course, is changing as a function of time. And technology is not only product technology, but could also be process technology. And then the other aspect here is the market, or the needs of the customer, and that's also changing as a function of time. So innovation is really a process that mediates between those two things. It's about finding a technology and mating it up with a market need in order to create an innovative product. There are kind of 3 points I want to make related to this graphic. One is the importance of timing. In other words, the technology has to line up in time with a market need. It's only if there's alignment that somebody is willing to pay for that product. There's lots of examples of the technology that existed, but the market need was way out. And so that's really not an innovation. It's an invention, but it's not an innovation. So timing is important. The second point that's important is that we so many times, I think, focus innovation on the greatest, newest technology, a new to the market, a radical innovation. Whereas the reality is, in most every organization, there's a range of innovation projects. On one end of the spectrum and maybe the bulk of the projects within the organization are incremental type of improvements on existing products. And on the other end of the spectrum might be radical, new to the world type of innovation, what gets a lot of the press. But the important point here is that in any organization, there's going to be a range of different types of projects that range from incremental all the way to new to the world, and there has to be a good balance between that. In many companies, there might be 75 to 80% of the projects might be incremental, and that's okay. An example is Apple. As innovative as they are considered, really they make most of their money by incremental innovation, not radical new to the world type innovation. They're very good at both, which is a very important point. And so you have to balance out the types of projects that you've got in your organization. And the final point I want to make about this graphic is, it's highlighted here, and that is I like to delineate marketing from marketing communications. Marketing communications is about the needs of the seller. It's about communicating your value proposition to the market. Marketing is about the needs of the buyer. It's about understanding those needs, whether they can be verbalized by the customer or whether they're latent needs, and you've got to discover them. And that's really what we're talking about in the innovation process, is the marketing role, not marketing communications. Now, in many organizations, it's the same person, especially if it's a smaller organization, but they're really two distinct functions, and it's important to remember that when we talk about the innovation process. Now, one thing that's missing in this discussion is that there's a lot of opportunities for business model innovation, which is a little more overarching compared to the discussion that we just had. Business models get into not only the products and the services and the market need and so forth, but it gets into the distribution of the product. It's the key resources that are required, the relationships that you form with customers. So that's really getting into the realm of the business model, and there are a lot of opportunities for business model innovation. And I think in general, especially smaller to mid-sized companies, ignore the opportunities for business model innovation. But it's a very important aspect and represents an opportunity for innovation. The final point is that when it comes to the innovation processes themselves, those are changing radically. It used to be, we did everything internally within the organization. We had our internal R&D organization, our internal development organizations, and that's how we did it. But now the internet's opening up all kinds of new ways of doing innovation, including collaborative innovation and open innovation, co-innovation. So all these are being supported by the disruptive nature of the internet and changing the landscape, so to speak, in terms of our methodologies. So if you accept the fact that innovation needs to be an important strategic part of your strategy, for growing your business and growing new sources of revenue and increasing and improving margins in the bottom line, then the question becomes, well, how can you become better at it? And that's what we're going to focus on. The rest of the talk is really what are the key aspects to become more innovative. And I've highlighted, I think, 5 important things that you really need to think about. The first 4 really are more related to a mindset. It's really about setting the stage for being successful long-term with innovation. These things have to be in place, and then the final point is the innovation processes themselves. I purposely put this at the end because we tend to want to, especially as managers, we want to jump to this, start working on the processes, do something. But really, long-term success really relies on some of these other things being in place first. So let's first talk about the concept of the management model and the culture that makes up the management model. A very important aspect, I think, is probably the #1 thing that you really need to think about in terms of improving your innovation ability. So when I throw out this term, the traditional management model, think about what that means to you. If there are concepts or even processes or words that come to mind about how we traditionally run businesses today, think about that. And if you do, you will see that there's some really kind of key tenets of this traditional management model that has been around for over 100 years. One is the concept of standardization. This is in particular in terms of our products. Right, we have a standardized product line. We try to understand the needs of the customer and come up with products and scale our business and have efficiencies and so forth to where we can crank out a number of standardized type products. So that's one key tenet of the traditional management model. Second is the concept of specialization, particularly in terms of our resources. We take a job and we break it down into its individual tasks, and then we hire specific people for those tasks. That's really, very dominant in our organizations today. And even our existing job descriptions kind of speak to this concept of specialization. Hierarchy, we're all very familiar with working in a hierarchy. We understand that, where you've got a CEO or a president or owner at the top of the pyramid, so to speak, and then the various levels below that. We all know as organizations get bigger and bigger, the downsides to hierarchy and how it crushes creativity and individuality. So we all know the pros and cons of working in a hierarchy. Fourth is this concept of alignment of goals. Really, all the processes that we have in a business are really about that. It's about looking at the strategy at the top of the pyramid in the hierarchy, that the CEO sets the strategy, and then all of our processes are meant to align those goals down through the organization. So that's a very important tenet of this traditional management model. And then finally, the concept that in order to motivate people, you have to provide extrinsic rewards, particularly through financial type means. That they won't do things based on their own motivation, that you have to motivate them with extrinsic rewards. So that's another key aspect of the traditional management model. And then overlaid on all of these is the concept of efficiency. It permeates our organizations all through all of this. How do we become more efficient? That's a big focus on every organization. Of course, if you work in a public company especially, you know what drives the senior manager, right? It's the quarterly numbers, the profitability. And not only that, the predictability of the numbers. It's not good enough to make the numbers. You have to be able to predict them and meet them quarter by quarter. So this kind of overlays everything that we do within the traditional management model. So I would make the case to you that if you think about that current model, the traditional model, has really been in place since the early 1900s, since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, basically, and really not much has changed. But I would make the case to you today that you see signs all around you that this traditional management model is being disrupted. And I think the key reason it's being disrupted is the advent of the internet. I mean, that's my number one reason why I believe that this current management model, which was built for the industrial age, is not sufficient now that we've moved into this post-industrial digital type of world. And you sense that. It just can't, it's not adaptable enough to the times that we're living in. And so there is a new management model, and we don't have time today to get into all of these aspects. I've written several articles. You can go to my website, my blog, and access multiple articles that I've written about this topic. I could spend the whole hour on this topic, but the fact is there is a new management model that's coming out of the old. And you can just look around you. Companies like Uber, which is a good example of business model innovation, W.L. Gore, Linux, and the open software movement. There's just example after example that are the effects of this disruption in the existing management model. I want to highlight two important insights as it applies to innovation management when it comes to thinking about the management model and the culture. And the first is that the realization that the management model and the culture that makes up the management model really should be looked at as a source of true competitive advantage. And to make that case, I want to use this mental model. On the left is the management model 2.0, so indicating that something new is coming from the old. And on the right is the company's business model or models, which inherent in the business model are the products and services that make up those business models. Those are two separate concepts in my mind, the business model and the management model and the culture that makes up the management model. But they interact with one another. They influence one another. They're kind of intertwined with one another. And both of these are sitting within the context of what's happening in the larger environment, which is this revolution caused by the internet and digital technologies that is affecting everything in society, including the way that we run businesses and the management model. And so, you know, one of the key areas of the disruption of the management model is the fact that knowledge has become a commodity. It moves faster through the economy today. So our business models and our products and services can be more easily copied and duplicated by our competitors. We sense that in our businesses today. The barriers to entry are falling quickly. And so you can't rely on that existing knowledge anymore to provide barriers of entry. I would make the case, though, that the management model and the culture that makes up that management model cannot be easily duplicated by your competitors. Really, the example I would use is if you think about a company like Apple, it's the same reason why you can't go out and read a book about Apple and come back to your organization and simply implement that culture. It just doesn't work. It's very context specific. It depends on the history of the company, the people, the technology, the competitive environment. It's very unique, and every business can create a unique business model, or I'm sorry, a unique management model and a unique culture that is very supportive of innovation. And again, I don't have time to get into it today. I have some case studies if you're interested. Happy to send you some more information about this, but I think it's an important point, and it's a plea that I make to senior management especially, to think about the management model and the culture as a way to gain competitive advantage, and not simply through business models and product and service innovation. Even though that remains important, but you should be spending as much, if not more, time on thinking about the management model and the culture as a source of true competitive advantage and what it means to creating a culture that supports innovation. And kind of related to that is this concept that part of that is rethinking the purpose of your business. Is it simply to make a profit, or are there other things that are important, like people and the planet? This concept of the triple bottom line, many companies are finding that this is not just hype, it's good for business. There are many examples. Again, I have a great little case study on a company that illustrates the point that, you know, for instance, from the aspect of people, which includes employees, it's really all about how can you create a unique management model and culture that really engages employees in a larger mission of the company, a larger purpose of the company, so that you don't have to motivate people through extrinsic rewards, but they are internally motivated. They really buy into that concept of the purpose of the organization, and that is just a great way to tap into the creativity and really boost your ability to innovate, and really is the essence of providing a culture that supports innovation. So again, these are very important things that need to be in place, the management model and the culture, and finding ways to create something unique for your business that will provide a competitive advantage and sets the stage for innovation success. Okay, the second point I want to make is related to the role of senior management. Now, even if you're not in senior management, this is important for you to understand, because so much of change that happens in an organization comes from the bottom up. So understanding this role of senior management is important even if you're not a senior manager. So the point I want to make here, it really kind of starts with a question, and I asked this to CEOs and presidents, who is responsible for innovation in your organization? And actually, sometimes when I ask this question, the CEO or the president will look at me and they'll say, well, R&D is responsible for innovation. And that's the wrong answer. I mean, the bottom line is that innovation is a key business process. It's not simply about the role of R&D. Even though they are important in many companies, it's not really, it's not simply about R&D. It's a key business process, and therefore the success or failure of innovation over the long term depends on senior management engagement. And engagement is different than involvement. It doesn't mean just coming to the meetings every once in a while. It means being actively engaged and looking at it as your key responsibility. And really the success or failure falls at the desk of the senior manager, in my opinion. And really when I think about it, when I talk to senior managers, it really comes down to 5 key areas that I like to focus on. One is this concept of the culture and the management model that we just talked about. Ultimately, the senior manager, whoever's responsible for the P&L, has to drive any changes that happens in that management model and the culture that makes up the management model. How do you, it goes back to that previous slide and focusing on that, and that's really a key role of the senior manager. Second is the strategic direction of the business. Now, the new management model, one of the key tenets of the new management model is more distributed decision making. And so, rather than the senior manager setting the strategic direction, the new management model requires giving up some of that power and distributing it through the organization, which is difficult for many senior managers, that have run companies for many years. But ultimately, whoever's in charge of the organization has to make sure that that gets done, and just as importantly, it gets communicated through the organization. Everybody in the organization, down to the person loading the product onto the truck, has to understand what the business model is and why customers buy your products. And that's an important role of the senior manager, to make sure everybody understands the business models and the strategies and so forth. Third is the concept of the fuzzy front end. I'm going to talk about that a little more here in a couple slides, but this is a very important part where the senior manager needs to be engaged, because it's really the part where you can get much better at innovation in most companies. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit, so to speak, in the fuzzy front end. And a lot of it has to do with decision making, which is the role of the senior manager in many cases. The concept of analysis paralysis. A lot of things get hung up in the fuzzy front end, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Fourth is the concept of NPD, knowledge is power. My experience is whoever's running organizations, they either come from sales, marketing, or finance, or they come from the engineering world, and both of them come to those jobs with biases. And it's important, even going back, when you go back and you think about that slide on innovation, a guy or a lady that's come from engineering has some biases towards the technology, but may need to understand more about the marketing aspect of innovation. And the person that's come from sales and marketing and finance may need to understand a little bit more about the technology aspect of innovation. So it's important for that person to become more broadly educated on innovation in general. And finally is the concept of presence. This is not about just showing up at the meetings. It's about being engaged with the project teams, the old adage of management by walking around is still applicable, you know, in today's environment. So that's very important as well for the senior manager to be present with the teams. Third, I want to make some comments about this, and really it's a mindset, and that is you need to think of innovation in terms of effectiveness, not just efficiency. And to make this point, I like to use this kind of tongue-in-cheek slide here. You know, there's a big focus in companies on efficiency. I mentioned it before, and all of us that work in organizations have been here and sensed this. The key point here is that new product development and innovation in general is unlike any other process in the business. Every other process can be driven to maximum efficiency and should be. There are real opportunities there. But innovation is different. Every project is different. And if you focus strictly on efficiency, you may be very efficient at getting a product to market, but if it's not successful in the market, then what good is it? So you really need to think more in terms of effectiveness versus efficiency. And this concept of efficiency permeates our organizations. It's really a key aspect of the traditional management model. This is Frederick Winslow Taylor that wrote a famous book back in the early 1900s called The Principles of Scientific Management. It was all about efficiency, right? In the industrial age, you know, these large organizations that were coming into being in the early 1900s, these large, massive manufacturing companies, it was all about how do you create these, mass-produce these products? How do you become more efficient? And it permeates down through our organizations today. Really, if you think about it, the lean manufacturing movement still is really all about efficiency. And I would just make the point that, you know, if you are focused on creating value, so to speak, through the lean methodologies and becoming more efficient, you are missing half of the equation. You really should be focusing on how do you develop products and services that customers want to buy, and how do you generate more revenue and increase your margins by improving and becoming more innovative, and not just focusing on the cost side of the business and getting more efficient. You know, if you think about this is an example from the software world. You know, we use Scrum today, and it's a perfect example of this concept of focusing on effectiveness versus efficiency. Scrum is a very messy process. It basically, you know, is not as necessarily as efficient, but when you get to the final product, it's something the customer actually wants, versus the old methodology of, you know, the waterfall technique, for instance, where, you know, you develop some specs, you write the software, you test it, and you roll it out, and then you find that it really doesn't hit the mark in terms of the customer needs. So it might have been more efficient use of the resources, but it certainly is not effective. So again, this is just an example of the mindset that you have to have in new product development. And for many senior managers, you know, who focus on efficiency and try to apply that to innovation, then you end up with all incremental type of projects. You never want to go out and do more risky projects, and this has especially been a problem since the financial crisis in 2008. So again, it's a mindset. Fourth point I want to make is also a mindset, really, and that is the need to create new knowledge. You know, as I mentioned, part of the disruption in the management model is that knowledge has become a commodity. It moves so fast through the economy today. You can't rely on the knowledge that you have providing a competitive advantage. So there's an imperative for every organization to create new knowledge and create it faster than ever before. So to make this point, I like to use this mental model called the knowledge funnel. And if you think about your business, at some point it was a startup. And at that phase in your business, you were struggling with some type of a mystery. Maybe it was a new technology and how to apply it to an existing market need. Maybe it was a new market need and trying to figure out what technology might solve it. Maybe it was a radical new business model. You know, so you were struggling with some type of mystery, you were trying to get the first product, started to generate some revenue, but at some point the business forms some heuristics, some rules of thumb, but ultimately every business wants to get down here in terms of taking that knowledge and turning it into an algorithm. It's really at that point that you can extract value out of that existing knowledge. The analogy in a manufacturing company might be the algorithm really is the drawings and the work procedures that manufacturing uses in order to manufacture the product. That's the algorithm. You've reduced that knowledge to drawings and work procedures, and then you can extract value out of that knowledge. The problem today is what? Companies get stuck down here. Right? They rely on their existing knowledge, they become more risk averse, and they forget about, in order to generate new sources of revenue, you have to generate new knowledge. Now you might do that through acquisitions, but I would make the case that if you rely strictly on acquisitions for generating new knowledge or for bringing new knowledge into the organization, it comes with its own downsides. It's not perfect. It's not applicable in every situation. And it needs to be balanced. You really need to have an internal innovation effort, and that means spending some resources on creating new knowledge. This is also a great tie-in to the concept of disruption in industries. You may have heard of that concept. It was made famous by Clayton Christensen, where you may be focused down here on your existing knowledge, and businesses today are very good at incremental changes in their products, but somebody might be up here thinking about your business and getting ready to disrupt your business. So again, it's a matter of refocusing a mindset about creating new knowledge, and that plays out in terms of how we manage innovation. Kind of related to this concept of knowledge is the need for managing for serendipity. And to make this point, I want you to think of what makes large urban cities such a hub of innovation and creativity. Some things may come to mind quickly, including, for instance, diversity. They are very diverse environments. They have people from all walks of life, all socioeconomic backgrounds, different parts of the world. They live in a very high density situation, which means there's easy face-to-face contact and communication, which leads to this concept of serendipity. It's the concept that not every big new idea can be planned. And it's very important when you think about creating knowledge in your organization that we focus so much on the processes, and those are important, but you got to think about the other half of the equation, which is how do we create an environment that will lead to more creativity. And you can do things to manage for serendipity. It might be, for instance, that's really what the open office movement really was all about, is creating the framework, or the physical space. So how you lay out physical space is very important in terms of encouraging this concept of serendipity. You just don't know where the next great idea is going to come from. So the point is that creating knowledge, managing for serendipity, these are all important and a mindset that you have to have, and sets the stage for innovation success. And then finally are the processes. And I put this at the end on purpose, because we tend to, especially type A managers like myself, tend to want to jump right to the processes and, let's improve the process. Let's put in this new best practice. We tend to jump right there, but you really have to have these things in place first in order to be successful long-term at innovation. But let's talk about the processes. Really, when it comes right down to it, it's all about this concept of workflow, decision, and information flow, these kind of three tracks across multiple functions within the organization. That's why innovation and new product development is unlike any other process in the business. And I've been in every process in a manufacturing company, and new product development and innovation is not like any other process because of this. So everything that we do is really around this, and it's all about mitigating and managing risk. That's really what innovation is all about. It's managing risk in order to quickly generate positive cash flows. That's what it's all about. Now this slide really makes the point that when you think about the processes that we use in innovation management, it's really a collection of many, many sub-processes that all interact with one another and have to work seamlessly with one another. So it starts at the beginning in terms of the business strategy and all the processes associated with that, and business model conceptualization and so on and so forth. Then you flow into what's called the fuzzy front end. It's all about understanding the market needs, defining new products, looking at thinking about your product line and product line strategies and platform strategies, and developing new concepts and testing the feasibility and so forth. So all this stuff that goes on in the fuzzy front end, but at some point projects flow out of that are well defined and then go into execution. So stage gate and the phase gate processes are all about execution, and then finally the products are in the market, and then there's life cycle management. So it all flows through here. Of course, it's not nice and linear. There's a lot of loop backs and so forth that happen here. And then you've got the concept of pipeline throughput management. This is really all about resource allocation. One of the common things in many organizations, when I go in and consult with a company, I'll first look at their overall portfolio of projects versus their resources. Typically, most companies will have way too many projects for the resources that they've got. So you really have to think critically about what you can do and what you can't do, because if you try to pack in too many projects given the resources, which we are always tend to do as humans, the whole system will bog down. So you've got throughput management, and you've also got portfolio mix management. This goes back to the concept that you need a mix of different types of risk profiles. You don't want all incremental projects any more than you want all radical new to the market. Now, depending on where the business is, there might be times where you need more or less of one or the other, but it's all about trying to figure out what the right mix is, and that's why we call it portfolio management. It's the same concept of balancing out risk in a financial portfolio. So these are all kind of the sub-processes that we have to worry about, related to information flow, decision flow, and workflow throughout the organization to get products to market. I want to focus on two particular aspects that I think are very important. One is this concept of the fuzzy front end. The fuzzy front end is a real source of opportunity in most every company. It's really where we can get much better. I mean, in the last 20 years, there's been a lot of focus on business strategy, a lot of focus on execution with phase gate and stage gate and so forth. But now I think the focus is turning more to how do we get better here? How do we better define products? How do we get faster decision making? So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in most organizations to get better at this, which links the business strategy to execution. And really you can pick up a lot of time to market by doing better at the fuzzy front end. This graphic kind of illustrates the key parts of the process in managing the fuzzy front end. It includes idea management. So every business has ideas that come into it from all over the place, and you have to manage those ideas. They then have to be prioritized against all the existing projects that you're working on and reprioritized. And then based on that prioritization, then you have to look at the resources. You have a resource allocation sub-process to line those resources up. Just because something is ranked number one doesn't mean you can work on it based on the resources. And then based on that analysis, then you come up with some type of a longer-term plan. What are you going to bring to market? Setting some goals about that. Having a simple goal of one new product a year can really focus an organization. But looking at that longer-term planning, and then back to the beginning. This is a never-ending process. It should be ongoing within the organization. At some point, projects pop out of this process and flow into the execution phase or the phase gate process. But I included here because the first couple phases in the phase gate process really, in my view, are still part of the fuzzy front end, because you may learn something at the beginning of the project that forces you to reprioritize it with new other ideas. So you may find out when you get into here that, hey, this is going to take us a lot longer than we thought. We have this new idea that's come in. Maybe we should shelve this idea for now or kill it outright and work on something else. So it's very important to be flexible and think about it and not get wedded to an existing product. But at some point, the project flows through here and comes out to market. So we don't have time to deal with all the ins and outs of the phase development processes. But the one thing I do want to point out is that phase gate, one of the problems with it is many companies mix up phase gate for project management. These phase development processes are not a project management tool. It's a framework that we use in order to manage a portfolio of projects and make sure that good decisions are getting made, but it doesn't tell the project manager how to run a project. That's really project management. And the important thing to remember about project management is that the tools are based on project risk. And I throw this slide in here because it's also important for senior management to understand risk profiles on projects. Not every project is the same. They can't be managed the same. And so this matrix is, I think, a really useful tool. On the x-axis are the sources of uncertainty for a project. You've got normal task variation. In other words, when we build a schedule, we have a task, we might estimate it at 2 weeks, but it's a statistical entity. It's 2 weeks plus or minus something. So you've got task variation everywhere in your schedule. Then you've got what are called foreseeable events, things that you can anticipate and figure out how you might mitigate if it happens. Then you've got what are called unknown unknowns. These are things that you don't know. And in some projects that dominates the project, and those are if you've ever run a project like that, those are very difficult to manage. On the y-axis is complexity. You might have a lot of parts in the product, but if they don't interact, it can be a low complexity system, whereas if there's a lot of interaction between the parts, then it's a high complexity system. So depending on where you are will drive the type of project management tools. Most project managers are skilled down here. This is where most project managers will be very comfortable. This is where we use tools like project buffers and Microsoft Project and that type of thing. But if you're out here, if you're dealing with a project that has a high level of unknown unknowns and is or very complex, doing a Microsoft project is a waste of time. It really is about what do we need to learn and how do we learn it as quickly as possible. That's where we use these techniques of iterate and learn. It's really the basis of the lean methodologies. So if you're facing a project or even a new business model or a new market that has a high level of uncertainty, then this is where the iterate and learn and the lean methodologies really come into play. This is where the fail fast and cheap is really applicable, because that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to learn. So Scrum, the lean methodologies, this concept of fail fast and fail cheap, it all is based on the age-old project management tool of iterate and learn. They're all based on this basic concept, and it's very important to understand that. And the fact that the tools change. You know, a project may start up here, but ultimately if it comes to market, it'll end up down here, and you can shift to, you know, more traditional project management tools. When somebody asks me, well, what about the, you know, the lean methodologies, lean product development, and those are great if you're out here, but a project that's down here, you don't necessarily need that mindset. You can run it as a traditional project and you don't have to focus on the lean methodologies necessarily. So again, it's very important for both senior management as well as project managers to understand project risk and what it means to manage in a project. Okay, so hopefully I've given you some things to think about in terms of the first four, which are really more about a mindset and about how do you set the stage for long-term innovation success. So thinking about the management model and the culture that makes up that management model, the role of senior management and how important that engagement is, the mindset through the organization that innovation really is all about effectiveness, not just efficiency, and fourth, the mindset that you need to find ways to create new knowledge faster than ever before, and managing for serendipity is a part of that. So once these things are in place, then you can think about your processes and how you're going to improve your processes in order to get better at innovation. Okay, so my company, as I mentioned, New Product Visions, I provide consulting. I do a lot of assessments where I might come in to a company and try to, make sense of what the problems are. Every company is very unique. Not every situation is the same, and so it's very context specific. The Innovation Coach workshops is another opportunity, and also I have some software enablers that I use with clients. The workshops that I provide are regional workshops, though they also can be customized and provided on site or online. The next ones coming up are in Atlanta, May 3rd and 4th, 2016, and then in Cincinnati in June 7th and 8th. A full agenda, 2-day workshop, lots of case studies and exercises and homework, and it's a full 2 days, 2-day agenda. There are some short-term benefits, certainly in terms of projects running smoother, better coordination, better use of the resources, improving decision-making, ways to do that. And then long-term, you should become more effective at long-term planning. Your new products will be more successful, and there's no reason you can't grow faster your top line and your margins. I mean, that's really what it's all about, is the long-term potential for growing the top line and the bottom line. And that's what really the ultimate payoff will be. Software enablers, I have some online portfolio management tool that I use with clients to help support portfolio management and getting better at these prioritization processes. NPD Risk Assessor is an empirical tool that can be used with high-risk projects to try to really look at the project and pull apart where the risk factors are, which will point the project leader and management into the direction of, where should we spend some time to make sure that we give our project, a new product, a better chance of success once it hits the market. And again, it's based on an empirical model. Greenlight Guru provides some specialized project management software for medical device manufacturers who need to meet FDA regulations. This is in terms of document control and risk management and so forth. So with that, I'll end. This is my contact information website. Through the website, you can access my blog. I write regular articles on all sorts of topics related to innovation if you're interested. My email address, follow me on Twitter. I have a YouTube channel, and I encourage you to reach out to me on LinkedIn if we're not connected. I also have a monthly column on innovation in a journal in South Carolina Manufacturing, so you can look for my content there. So with that, I want to thank you for listening, and if I can help you in any way in the future, please reach out to me. Have a great day. Thanks.